When I think of fashion of the 1980s, my mind always goes to John Hughes films, to St. Elmo's Fire, to Flashdance, the kind of affordable and attainable looks that you could acquire at any shopping mall. But the 80s were a pivotal time for couture and film. I think this is the decade where you really saw couturiers and famed fashion houses realizing that they can impart and, in fact, define the narrative of films.
You know, you're walking awful thin line, Julie. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I mean, you're getting awful cocky. All the rest of the boys are happy with a car, house in the hills, but not you.
The 80s were also the time of yuppie consumerism. It was really a decade of branding. And you see this in Paul Schrader's American Gigolo, which kicked off the decade in 1980. This is the film that made Armani, who was an emerging designer in Europe, household. He really defined what the power suit was going to become for the decade and was known as the king of the blazer because of American Gigolo. American Gigolo is a sex-infused neo-noir thriller that predicted the materialism and luxuriant excess of the decade to come.
I would have thought that you'd live in a place with thick red carpet, big circular bed, mirrors on the ceiling.
Bordello. This is my apartment. Women don't come here.
Armani's construction of the menswear that is worn by Julian Kay was really revolutionary. This is an aesthetic of less structured, more featherweight suits that merged formal wear with casual wear. He really looks like he's floating on air wearing these outfits. And it's not just the suits that are important here, it's also the more casual looks like the denim. Those seamless jeans that Julian Kay wears in this film are such a fashion moment, and they really show that Armani was designing these head-to-toe looks, not just of menswear that included suits, but of polo shirts, of shoes, of denim. This was a fashion milestone that really predicted how men in power would dress throughout the 1980s.
No, Michelle. I'm really not part of your problems. I'm certainly not the solution to your problems.
I brought money.
I don't want your money.
American Gigolo was an R-rated pop culture sensation, and its fashion influence could be seen throughout Wall Street, in Hollywood, on fashion runways, and truthfully is felt throughout the 80s and up to this day.
Well, what do you think? Huh?
Not bad.
Yeah, I want to steal your thunder. He's teaching me how to dress.
Filmmakers in the 1980s were really looking to underground subcultures for the first time, and the kinds of clothes that were found in those subcultures. And you see that in 1983's The Hunger, directed by Tony Scott. Tony Scott really brought the elegance of Yves Saint Laurent's runway to the grittiness of Manhattan's underground goth clubs. The Hunger is the preeminent fashion vampire film of the 1980s. It's this erotic horror film that really brought the vampire into the modern age.
Are you making a pass at me, Mrs. Blahnik? Miriam. Miriam? Not that I'm aware of, Sarah.
The fashion within vampire films prior to The Hunger was very old world. Think of Bela Lugosi's Cape and Max Schreck and Christopher Lee from the Hammer horror films or Klaus Kinski. These are very in vogue vampires that are fashionably conscious and wearing couture in a way that no vampire had prior.
These are liver spots, aren't they?
They look like it, yes.
I didn't have them yesterday. Yesterday I was 30 years old.
That's remarkable.
I'm a young man. Do you understand? I'm a young man.
The Hunger has multiple layers of the fashion runway and couture within it. You have the stunning designs of Yves Saint Laurent working with his muse, Catherine Deneuve. These little military, almost air cadet-inspired film noir numbers with pointy sunglasses and Chanel bright red lipstick. Catherine Deneuve had never looked like this before, and it's such a stunning moment in fashion history. By 1983, Catherine Deneuve and David Bowie were fashion icons, and they had been for decades. Yet this film, The Hunger, amplified that status. I think it really makes this film one of the most famous fashion films of all time.
long is it going to take? How long do the others take?
I don't know.
You must remember, Miriam. I know it's a long time, but it's not the kind of thing that you forget.
1983 is a real watershed moment in fashion history. It's the year that Diana Vreeland organized a retrospective at the Met dedicated to Yves Saint Laurent. It marked the first time that the museum had celebrated a living artist's work and really signaled that fashion was art. Costume designer Melina Canonaro won her first Academy Award for 1975's Barry Lyndon. And there's a real moment or a conversation here with The Hunger in the sequence where we see John and Marion Blaylock in the 18th century. This is a sequence where Canonaro sourced a lot of these costumes from the famed Torelli costume house in Rome. Melina Canonaro is a very detail-oriented, meticulous perfectionist, and there's a story from this film that I think really demonstrates that. She couldn't find the right fabric for one of David Bowie's pocket squares, so she flew to Rome over the weekend just to source a tiny piece of fabric that you see ever so briefly in this film. It really emphasizes that Melina Canonaro is an unparalleled costume designer.
Forgive me.
Canonaro, prior to designing for film, worked in fashion houses and in boutiques, so I think she really understood the idea of haute couture, consumerism, and fantasy. You're seeing that all come together here in The Hunger. The Hunger would hugely influence the catwalks of years to come. You see Alexander McQueen in 1996 dedicate an entire fashion line just to this film. It's a film that 40 years later is still being referenced by fashion designers, and a film that I think is one of the most fashion-forward of the 1980s. Liquid Sky, which celebrates its 40th anniversary this year, is the ultimate cult fashion extravaganza. It mixes avant-garde film with science fiction, with Andy Warhol. It is hard to describe, but what is so apparent in just looking at any image from Liquid Sky is that this is the ultimate neon film. It's a neon fashion fantasy, and it's part of what was called the New Beauty movement. The New Beauty movement, as defined by Nicky Carson and his modeling agency La Rocca, really defied what beauty standards were up to that time. These were models that you would not see on the cover of Glamour magazine. They had shaved heads, they had tattoos, the makeup is angular and bright, and it really defined that the 1980s was going to have its own brand of beauty. The costume designer for Liquid Sky is Marina Levikova, and she drew inspiration from the real-life club kids of New York. There was a club in operation at the time called the Mud Club, and it's really there that she saw what these club goers were creating from fabrics and vintage stores and bringing it to the big screen. For a midnight film, for a cult film, it's surprising that Liquid Sky would have such a huge influence on fashion in the years to come. By the early 90s, there was a store in New York City on Lafayette that was called Liquid Sky. It was a vintage store. It was where you went if you were fashionable. And in fact, one of its salespeople was Chloe Sevigny, and that was her introduction to the fashion world and to film. It's a film that was very quickly emulated by department stores like Bloomingdale's. By 1983, you would walk down Fifth Avenue and see these day-glow palettes, and I think it's really Liquid Sky that can be attributed to inspiring these very famous fashion labels to look to underground designers.
You don't admit to dressing strange? Strange. You're strange. What do you mean by that? I'm not wearing rags. You're wearing what they want from you, baby. Who they?
America.
Closing out the 1980s was The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, one of the most fetishistic, fashion-forward films of the latter part of that decade. The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover is about excess, obsession, greed, fetish, morbid jealousy, and what better themes to pair than with haute couture? Director Peter Greenaway came from a painting background, so it's really significant here that you're seeing this Fauvist color palette. It's garish beyond belief, but that's the point of Greenaway's film, which was meant as a takedown of British excess in the age of Thatcher.
Tell Michael you live in a big house and you spend £400 a week on clothes.
I spend £400 a week on clothes.
You have a petrol allowance of £40 a week.
I have a petrol allowance of £40 a week, which I never use.
You wear beautiful things.
I wear beautiful things.
You eat in the best restaurants.
I eat in the best restaurants.
Georgina, try a little harder, please.
Peter Greenaway in interviews described this film as feeling like a worm-infested body which is covered in extraordinary gloss of elaborate clothing, feathered hats. It's as though there's an attempt to try and hide the horror, the despair, the sense of violence and lust that's contained just underneath.
The naughty bits and the dirty bits are so close together that it just goes to show how eating and sex are related. Georgie's naughty bits are nicely related, aren't they, Georgie? Especially when she's paying me attention. Georgie?
Helen Mirren in this film is luminous. This is Jean-Paul Gaultier with his signature corsetry, using Helen Mirren to really paint a picture. She is the victim of her husband's brutishness. We see the corsetry almost act as a birdcage, like she's trapped within. And then when she's in these lustful moments with her lover, she's bathed in red satin. It's such a luminous, luxuriant film that really combines fetishism with fashion. Gaultier is working hand in hand with Greenaway to design Helen Mirren's costumes so that she somehow blends into the background. I think that makes a lot of sense when you realize that Greenaway was a painter. This is really a tableau that he's creating with costumes as one of the most important elements. We think of the 1980s in fashion as an era of excess and consumerism, but it's also an era of high art. This is the decade where couturiers really found their placing in film and where filmmakers were looking at couturiers for inspiration and in fact informed entire narratives of film.